Hello, everyone. This is User Phil from the Linux Mint forums, member PhD 21. One of the questions that comes up frequently on the Linux Mint forums is like, how can you resize computer hard drive partitions to take space from one partition and put it on another partition? It's common for people that just started using Linux Mint to have, their computers already had Microsoft Windows on it, or they had Macintosh operating systems on it, and they'll install Linux Mint alongside that. So they basically have what we call in the computer field, they're dual booting. They can boot it into Windows or Macintosh, and then when they want to, boot into Linux Mint. And the hard drive is split up. Anyway, or a lot of people will just install Linux Mint and overwrite Microsoft Windows that was already on there, or the Macintosh operating system that was already on there. But this is in response to a Linux Mint forum member. One of the posts was that they wanted to take some of the space from their Microsoft Windows partition and move that into their Linux Mint partition. And it just so happens that yesterday I had to do a similar procedure because I have two computer operating systems on my computer. They're both Linux Mint, though. I have Linux Mint 17.3 on one partition and Linux Mint 18.3 on another. And my Linux Mint 18.3 partition was running out of room. But I had enough extra space on my Linux Mint 17.3 partition where I could take some space from that and move it into my Linux Mint 18 partition. Now this user says, I only have 30 gigabytes used out of 150 gigabytes allocated to the Microsoft Windows NTFS partition. I'd like to bring that partition down to 50 gigabytes, but it won't shrink whether I use a partition manager editor in Windows or in Linux using GParted. And he can't create the free space, the unallocated space, to move it to his Linux Mint partition. And for some reason, had a 16 gigabyte chunk of unallocated free space just sitting there. And I suspect that that's because he was trying to use the partition manager or editor while he was in Windows or in Linux Mint on the drive that he's booted into. You're not supposed to be able to change, resize, or move or hard drive partitions that you're in, that they're mounted and they're being used. In order to do that effectively, you want to create a bootable CD or DVD disk or USB stick of a partition manager editor program and use that. Now, all the Linux Mint editions, there's 4 wonderful editions of Linux Mint: Cinnamon, Mate, KDE, XFCE. When you download those originally, they're what they call installation test drive versions. They have a partition manager already built in. Which you could use, like GParted. Linux Mint KDE has its own KDE partition manager. Pardon me. I prefer to use a separate bootable CD, DVD, or USB stick of a program called GParted Live to do any kind of partition changes that need to be made. And it seems to work a lot faster using GParted Live from a bootable disk than it does within like Linux Mint for some reason, at least in my case. Anyway, but before doing any partition changes, it's a really good idea to back up, to an external USB hard drive, cloud storage device, cloud provider, because there's always a possibility that something could go wrong during the partitioning, and a power outage, you didn't do it right, and there could be data loss. So if you have a backup, that covers you. I also highly, highly recommend creating a bootable CD or DVD disc or USB stick of what I call emergency utility programs, one of which is called SuperGrub 2. And if you go to Google or any search engine and you search for SuperGrub or SuperGrub 2, it'll take you to their website, supergrubdisk.org, where you can download a copy of that and burn that to a DVD, a CD, or a DVD. It's actually small, so you can put it on a CD or a DVD or a USB stick. This would allow you to get into your Windows or Linux system, even if you have a problem booting up to begin with. Another really great emergency utility is called Boot Repair Disk. I have both of these, always have these on hand. The Boot Repair Disk, same thing. Go to Google, whatever, search for Boot Repair Disk, and it's on SourceForge. This will repair most boot up problems with a simple one-click repair. Their first option when you bring that up is called recommended repair, and that usually will fix most boot up problems. But if you partition, if you make changes to your hard drive partitions correctly, you won't need to use either SuperGrub 2 or Boot Repair Disk. And the purpose of this tutorial is to show you what I do, and it works without having to use SuperGrub 2 or Boot Repair Disk. And I use GParted Live. Now, all these utilities come in 32-bit or 64-bit versions. If your computers are 32-bit, use the 32-bit versions. If they're 64-bit, use the 64-bit versions. Now, because I'm creating a video demo and I had to have software to record the video, I've got a fully installed Linux Mint Cinnamon Edition 64-bit on my system right now. And I've installed GParted into that, which is like GParted Live, only it's installed into my Linux Mint system on a separate drive or a separate USB stick. Because as I just stated, in order to change your normal primary drive, you can't be in it. You have to boot to something else and use a partition manager to change that. So I have GParted here on my desktop, and I'm going to double-click that to get into it. It asks for your administration password, so put your password in. and when it comes up, it's going to use the first drive that your first drive that it finds, which is normally your internal hard drive, and it will display any partitions that that drive has. But partition manager editors work on internal hard drives, external hard drives, USB sticks. Knowing how to use it gives you a lot of flexibility on what you want to be able to do with your system. Now, when GParted comes up, in the upper right-hand corner is a list of the drives it detected when you brought it up. In this case, I have my primary drive, SDA. In Linux, the drives are called SD something, like SDA, SDB, SDC, which stands for SCSI, Small Computer System Interface Drive, and then drive A, drive B, drive C. In Windows, you would have drive C, drive D, drive E, very similar. Anyway, in this case, I'm going to resize and move different partitions on my primary drive. Similar to what the user posted. I want to take some space from one partition and give it to another partition. I'm going to take that a little further. I've got 3 partitions. I've got my first partition on this drive is a Linux Mint 17.3 system. And my second partition is a Linux Mint 18 partition. And they use the Linux file system ext4. I have a third partition called a data partition, where I put stuff I want to be able to use in either one of those. And that's a Microsoft Windows NTFS partition. So I'm going to take a little bit of space from the one partition and add that to each of these. And it's really simple to do. The method that I use has always worked for me and doesn't require having to update to repair the boot up, what they call grub 2 boot up process. The partition that I want to get some space from is called SDA1. It's on a drive called SDA, and as I just pointed out, it's got 3 primary partitions and a swap, what they call a Linux swap partition. But anyway, the space I want to take from is on the Linux Mint 17 system. It's got, and you can see here, if you click it, it's got, this partition only has 74 gigabytes. I'm using 56 gigabytes, well, 57 gigabytes, and there's 17 gigabytes free. Pardon me. It wouldn't matter if I had 100 gigabytes free or whatever. Whatever space that you want to be able to free up from this partition, you can distribute to the other partition or partitions. And here's the process. You click the first partition that has the space that you want to free up. You right-click it. You click Resize, Move. And it pops up with a little window, the Resize Move window. And it's got a little bar graph on the top representing that partition. And underneath that, it's got various entries for free space preceding that partition and free space following that partition. And the easiest way is graphically. If you mouse over to the right edge of the partition, the cursor turns into a double cursor. And all you got to do is click your mouse and hold it down, and then drag it to the left. And as you're doing that, the free space following that partition will increase. So if I wanted to say, let's say, I wanted to free up 10 gigabytes. Now, the user wanted to free up a lot more than that. Whatever you want to free up. Okay, so I'm going to drag it over here. I'm just going to arbitrarily pick 10 gigabytes. Now, what I have found is the way gigabytes are handled on the different operating systems, that if I went specifically, just to 10, like an even 10, and then said resize, it's going to actually be less than that. Which I just did, and as you can see, it created this new unallocated free space, and it's actually 9.79. Well, I want 10 gigabytes, so I have to go a little bit higher than that. Now, if you make a mistake, all you do is, or you want to change it, just click undo. Okay, so I'm going to do it again. I'm going to click that partition that I want to get some space from, right-click it, resize, go to, click and hold on the right edge, and drag it over. And this time, I want free space to be a little over 10 gigabytes. I'm going to take it up to about, well, in this case, 1,000 megabytes is a gigabyte. So, and I want 10 gigabytes in my case. Your case could be different. So I'm going to take it up to not quite 11 gigabytes, but close to it. And then I click resize. Now, if I click that new part, it shows that it's around 10 gigabytes. And, you can experiment to see what your system does. But anyway, and that's good enough. So I basically shrunk the first partition, which freed up the space that I wanted. Now, I need to give that space to the next partition, the partition I want the space to have. So I click my Linux Mint 18 partition, and I right-click that. I click Resize, Move. Now, I'm just going to click the whole partition, click and hold, and just drag it, slide it all the way to the left. Boom. And then click Resize. Now, it comes up with a message saying, moving a partition might cause your operating system to fail to boot. And that has happened to me, and many others. But if you do it the way that I'm describing, you should be fine. Click OK on that. Now the free space moved to the right of the partition I want to add it to. So it's following that partition. So now I click that partition again, and I right-click, and I say Resize and Move. Now I go to the right edge, and it turns into a double arrow. I click and hold that. Now, if I just want all that space to go to this partition, I can just slide it all the way to the right. And it says free space following 0. And that's it. Click Resize, and then click Apply. But in this case, I also want to, I only want half of that space, that 10 gigabytes, to go to this partition, but I want to add the other, which means I'm going to add 5 gigabytes to that. And I want to add the other 5 gigabytes to this third tertiary partition, my data partition. So, that means I'm going to have to split it's a 10 gigabyte of free space, so I'm going to put 5 into this partition and 5 into the other one. And as I said, it's a little bit more. You always might make it a little bit higher. Okay. In this case, I just chose 5 gigabytes and 5.4, and I click Resize. Boom. And now I've increased my second partition, my Linux Mint 18, by that amount, and I still have 5.29 gigabytes left over, which I can now add to my third tertiary data partition. And I do that the exact same way that I just did it for the second partition. I click that partition, my data partition, I right-click that, I click Resize, Move, I click the whole partition, slide it to the left, and click Resize. It gives me the message, I click OK, I right-click it again, click Resize, click on the far right edge, and then just drag it all the way to the right till it says, free space is 0, and then I click Resize. Now, you can click Apply, and it will make all that happen. Now, I found, that it's better to do 1 or 2 procedures at a time. Normally, I would click the partition I'm going to get the free space for, create the free space by shrinking it, and I would click Apply right after that. That's very fast. Then I would move the secondary partition over and then increase it to the size that I want it to be. Then click Apply, let it finish that. Whenever that takes a lot longer, depending on how much data is already on the drive, how fast the drive is, and all that. And then I would do the same thing again for any other partition stuff. You could do it all at once, which is what I just showed here, and I could just click there. But I found that sometimes that doesn't always work, that it's better to do it, apply after every 1 or every 2 procedures. And then you just click Apply, and when it's finished, and it could, depending on your drives and how much data it has to move, it could be pretty quick, or it could take hours. On mine, it took a little less than an hour on a solid-state drive. But let it finish, and once it's completely finished, exit GParted. Just click the X in the upper right, or GParted quit, and then reboot your system, and it should just work perfectly. If for some reason it didn't, well, then you could use the boot repair disk to fix it. Or at least use SuperGrub 2 to get into your system so you're not down. Anyway, I hope that was helpful, and I hope you all have a great day and night.